back in the 1990s, I was working with Howard Mellett, and we wrote a paper published in 1999 about the early years of disclosing PFI transactions. And we actually looked at the first 15 NHS hospital PFI schemes. And what we found was actually that little was disclosed in public sector financial statements about these schemes. For example, of the 15 PFI schemes, only 11 of the hospital trusts gave, 11 out of the 15 trusts gave no disclosures at all about their PFI schemes as they were being developed in their summarised accounts. These are the ones that the public could get hold of relatively easily. In their detailed accounts, which were very difficult to get hold of, only 9 out of 15 gave information about the PFI schemes as post-balance sheet events. And it led us to a conclusion that voluntary disclosure, expecting voluntary disclosure about these sorts of off-balance sheet arrangements isn't going to work. Basically, you have to have the regulation in both private and public sector if these things are going to be disclosed. It became apparent through these schemes early on that these schemes allowed public sector obligations to be kept off balance sheet. So we had these schemes where we could contract for public sector assets, for public service assets. Okay, we got the assets. There was no immediate cash payment, so that wasn't going to affect public sector cash figures. But also the obligations to pay for them were not shown on financial statements of the entities, wouldn't have been in whole of government accounts, and weren't shown in the national accounts either. Okay, so you've got assets, no cash to pay, no recorded obligations. This is a dream, isn't it? This is a dream for politicians and senior leaders of public services to be able to do this. Interim guidelines existed from the Treasury Task Force, which were essentially based on a rather loose interpretation of risks and rewards based on the variability of returns to equity operators. So as a result, these things largely were kept off balance sheet. This graph is taken from Treasury figures. It basically shows what happened with PFI, that in the early years it's difficult to construct these schemes, so not much is happening, and then things start to take off. When these schemes get to be fully understood, then they start to take off. The number of schemes increasing there up to over 100, and the capital value of the schemes going up as well. And then you see that the capital value moves around a bit, but broadly remains consistent between about 3 and 4 billion a year. But the number of schemes actually goes down, so the schemes start to get bigger as these schemes get combined. Most notably in the school sector, where the Building Schools for the Future programme bundles together schools for these deals. The figures start to build up. By 2011, we've got these Treasury figures here. This excludes the London Underground PPP, which is quite a few billion on top. 55.5 billion. This is the capital value, not the total amounts to be paid, which are 3 or 4 times that amount. 55 billion over up to February 2010. I don't know how you view these figures. My first reaction is that 55 billion is actually quite a lot of money. It is quite a lot of money. Or on the other hand, you might say, well, what's that? It's one small bank bailout, isn't it? But the trouble is, if we relate anything to bank bailouts, it becomes petty cash, doesn't it? So I don't think we'll go there. The other thing to notice is that the schemes get concentrated in particular sectors: children's schools and families, particularly the schools programme, health, big hospital schemes, transport schemes, and defence, particularly big users of PFI. And the accounting is interesting because under UK GAAP, what happens is that these schemes are largely kept off balance sheet. This is a summary that I included in a paper I wrote with Howard and was published in 2012 in the British Accounting Review. And it shows of this total capital value, just on the bottom line there, 40 billion is off balance sheet, about 15 billion is on balance sheet. So about 80% of these schemes are kept off the balance sheet in terms of both capital values and project numbers as well. Some of these, I think, things are quite interesting. Notice the local government line there, where nothing is on balance sheet. everything is off balance sheet. It shows the impact of particular regulations within sectors. The reason for this is that in the local government sector, for these schemes to work, local government had to get what were called PFI credits, and they were required to be revenue schemes. So if they're required to be revenue schemes, you make them revenue schemes, don't you? You work at it and you make sure they're revenue schemes, because if they're not going to be accepted. So local government's interesting. Everything is off balance sheet for them. But it's a similar pattern throughout the various sectors. And then I've called death. Death is not about death of PFI, but rather death of UK gap accounting for PFI, arising as a result of the UK, first of all, listed companies moving to IFRS, and then the government moving public sector accounting to IFRS from 2009-10, which meant that we're now subject to, formally to IFRIC 12 on service concessions, and in principle as a guide, IPSAS 32, looking at the grantor's perspective. And importantly, what this does is it changes the basis of accounting from a risk and rewards basis. If you have the risks and rewards, you put it on the balance sheet. If you don't, then you don't. And it switches it to a control and regulate perspective. And the result of this is that basically nearly all these liabilities suddenly come on balance sheet. So this is a table from the same paper that I wrote with Howard Mellett, which shows the treatment under IFRS based upon Treasury data up to March 2011. And what you'll notice now, along the total along the bottom line there, is that now almost everything is on balance sheet. So it's sort of 90-95% is now on balance sheet. And that's pretty consistent almost all the way through. Notice local government now, suddenly, nearly all their schemes are on balance sheet, as with other sections. The odd one out there, in the middle of the table, is DEFRA, the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. When we looked at the table, all of theirs are off balance sheet, and we actually wrote to them to say, yeah, why is this? And I think basically they got the figures wrong. I think they got it wrong in their analysis. Because I noticed more recently, I looked at the updated table, and basically nearly all of them are on balance sheet as well. So suddenly these schemes, which were service arrangements, no need to record the liabilities, suddenly they become on balance sheet. And importantly, what this does, of course, is it removes PFI as a way of creating OOBs, off balance sheet obligations. And then we have the financial crisis, and the number of PFI schemes, the completion of them starts to dry up, 63 in 2008, 22 in 2009. In the meantime, so we bail out some of the